that you do, each of you, in your respective positions. I won't call them jobs because it's most of us, it's our life work, huh? It's not just a job, it's an adventure, right? So, welcome. So glad to see you all this morning. I'm going to start with the universal thought. And I want to start with music. You know, music is known as a universal language. So whether it's pop or country or soul or jazz, whatever type it is, music has a way of resetting us and calming our spirit and resetting our minds. And music is also thought of as a language of kindness. And I think we've all heard that one, that music soothes the savage beast, right? So here's a wonderful idea that we should try every day. A warm smile, even for a stranger, because that can make another person feel better that day. And it seems like nature seems to smile at us, right? Nature wears smiles. Well, I would say all except for those furious storms and tornadoes, things like that. But when we look at the sunflowers or roses or palm trees and all the ocean, that's really a calmer. I love that we live in Southern California. Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Eleanor Roosevelt said, "With a new day comes new strength and new thoughts." Her husband, Theodore Roosevelt, said, "Keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground." Hmm. One of my favorite is Jim Rohn. He says, "Either you run the day or the day runs you." So all those things considered, we're superstars. I think I'm in the room with a bunch of superstars right now. And I'm really grateful for each of you and the way you impact others' lives. On behalf of Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez, who is the executive director of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, I greet you. The council is really busy. Dr. Rodriguez is amazing. And if you haven't been to her trauma bonding or the residual from trauma training, then maybe we need to have her run that again for us. And she's really good at it, and she's amazing. And so, on behalf of the DV Council, we applaud you all for the work that you do across our county. And even when you help somebody that's coming from another city to here. So today we have Samantha, Detective Samantha. She's the new DV coordinator for the Sheriff's Department. And I'm really happy that she made time for us because that's what she does. And so she's going to share some stuff with us that'll help us to help others. And especially in our faith community, this thing still doesn't get talked about from the microphone, I would say, because they have different terms for what they call pulpit or, whatever, the stage, whatever. But that's why we can carry it back and maybe have a conversation with our pastor or our chaplain or our priest or pope and share what we learned today. I think that's one of the reasons why we're here, right? Good job. So I present to you the wonderful she's the new sheriff in town. And she's the DV coordinator. Can we give her a little hand? Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me see. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay. Can everybody see the presentation okay and hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So like Karen said, I am a detective with the Sheriff's Office. I am new to this position. Previous to this, I was in Santee. I worked patrol for several years and then worked at the women's jail at Las Colinas, also in Santee. So my current position is the domestic violence coordinator for the county. So this presentation is geared towards the communities. So not much has changed. I really hadn't removed anything. I know this is a faith-based community organization, but everything is pretty much the exact same. Obviously, everyone in faith communities is just like everybody else. They are touched by domestic violence, just like everybody else. Part of the slides in here, you'll see the some stats. If it wouldn't be a domestic violence or a sheriff's department presentation without some statistics. So I start with those. Please feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions. I pretty much am looking at just my PowerPoint. So if I miss something, please feel free to unmute and tell me that someone raised their hand. I'm not sure how that's going to show up on my screen. This is my first time giving a presentation on Zoom, so bear with me if there's anything that's messed up. But just a little bit about the Sheriff's Department. We have 4,000 employees, sworn and professional. We service 4,200 square miles. We have 21 stations and substations, 7 detention facilities. We have 9 contract cities, 6 courthouses, and we provide multi-jurisdictional assistance and support to those other allied agencies, the smaller agencies in the county. We have a regional crime lab and main evidence. So regional crime lab, that's important for, I think, you guys to know, just because other agencies will bring their, if they have like a DNA request and stuff, a lot of that stuff gets processed at our crime lab. So the sheriff's is not just working on just the sheriff's crime lab request, but also other agencies' requests as well. So these are statistics from 2018 to 2022. I don't have the current ones for 23, 24. However, if you can kind of see they're fairly similar. There's not a whole lot of disparity. I know that we're on track for being about the same as the previous years. So I don't really like the way that this is set up. The very first, it says total calls for service here. Total calls for service is 234, 220,000. That's pretty much the same until you get to 2022, where it's a little less. That's the total calls for service. So that's all like traffic collisions, lost my wallet, all the way to domestic violence, to homicides and shootings and stabbings and stuff. So that's all the calls for service. Underneath it, the next line says total domestic violence calls. That's about 15,000, pretty even each year, give or take. The next 4, so the family disturbance, preserves of peace, violation of restraining order, and the domestic violence abuse. Those are all broken up. So if you add up all 4 of these, it equals the total domestic violence call. So they broke it up a little bit, just so you can kind of see what kind of domestic violence calls we're responding to. A family disturbance might just be, hey, me and my spouse are fighting, or hey, me and my kids are fighting, or what have you. Raised hand. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Will the sheriffs deliver a restraining order, especially if it's a criminal restraining order or criminal protective order? Will they deliver that to the person if they're not in jail, or is it only when they're in jail?
Yes, so the sheriffs, we have a whole unit that is the court fields unit. They will serve restraining orders, so they will go out to businesses, to homes, wherever, to try and contact the suspect. That has to be specifically requested in a certain court document filled out when you apply for the restraining order. But yes, they do that. Also, just like if law enforcement responds to a scene and we're on scene, they say, hey, I got a restraining order, it's not served yet, we will serve it on scene. And I think that is the same for other agencies as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other? I see there's a chat thing here. Okay, cool. Make sure I don't miss anybody else. So family disturbances, they're, maybe a crime hasn't been committed yet. So if you're arguing with your spouse or your kids, something like that. A preserve the peace would also be something where a crime hasn't been committed yet. We're like, hey, I want to go pick up property from my ex's house. I think there'll be a fight. Can you guys escort me? That way we can avoid the fight altogether. So those first 2 generally are okay. There's usually not a big, issue with either of those. Sometimes those don't arise to actual crime being committed. However, the violation of the restraining order and then the domestic violence, the last 2, those are obviously where we're in the realm of like, hey, someone's probably going to jail, a report's being taken, things of that nature. The next slide is very similar information, but it incorporates the other agencies. So the other agencies within the county, and the sheriff's department's total. So they're pretty much the same. If you look like Coronado, for example, 2018, they had 46 domestic violence incidences, the next year 40, 41. So it doesn't change too much. All of those numbers are fairly similar to one another. There's obviously ebbs and flows. But that is just some statistics. What is also, this next slide is incorporating the entire county. So this is not just the sheriff's jurisdiction. This is all the jurisdictions in the county. There's 3.4 million people in San Diego County. 2018, there's 17,000 DV cases and some change. And then of those, there's 18 homicides. So 2019, 17 homicides, 2020 was 13, 2021 was 9, and then 2022 was 14. I believe last year's was fairly low.
Yes, it was.
Exact, maybe
Yeah,
5, I think.
2023, I think 2023 was 10 homicides.
10, okay.
And then, no, I think it was 5.
Yeah, I thought it was low, somewhere around
Yeah,
5.
it's very low,
I
which is
don't
great.
know what 2024's is. I know it is higher, just based on, I mean, the news. I know that they've had recent homicides that have been in the news that's surpassed the 5 that were for 2023. So the next slide is kind of an example of 2022's homicides that they had. So I'm gonna read these. This is a good example of this kind of touching every socioeconomic status, every geographical area, age group too. You'll see there's a lot of age disparities here. So this is not just happening elsewhere. It happens in every city, and it touches everyone. So on January 27th, 2022, Erica was stabbed by her estranged husband, Caden, 29, in the parking lot of their apartment in Spring Valley. She later died from injuries, and his trial is scheduled for November. March 20, 2022, Jonathan was stabbed by his girlfriend in their apartment in Oceanside. He later died from his injuries. She pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. April 28, 2023, I think that was supposed to be 2022. Calvin was stabbed by his girlfriend, Amelia, outside in National City. He later died from his injuries. She pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 11 years of state prison. Anita, 83, was shot by her husband, Stanley, 86, in their home in Point Loma. Stanley then died by suicide. June 14th, Nahal was beaten by her former dating partner in their apartment in Rancho Penasquitas. The trial is set for this January. August, Fatme was shot by her husband, 45, in their home in El Cajon. That preliminary exam was scheduled for September. I don't know the outcome of that one. October 12th, Myra was stabbed. So Myra, 41, stabbed in the parking lot by her dating partner, 68, in a parking lot in Vista. October 28th, Fanny Lopez, 16, was shot by her dating partner, Manuel, 20, in his apartment in Nestor. Manuel then died by suicide. November 15th, Kayla, 27, was shot by her husband, Sri, 57, at a hotel in Harbor Island. He then died by suicide. October 31st, Michelle and her sister, Teresa, were shot by Michelle's boyfriend, Kenneth, in their mobile home in Lakeside. He then later died by suicide. These other 3 down here are they're domestic violence related. So it's the significant other of the spouse. So January 21, Wesley, 36, was shot to death by his dating partner's estranged husband, Daniel, at a garage in Santee. Isaac then died by suicide. This is the only one that I'm familiar with. I responded to this case, and Daniel was trying to leave the scene. We did a traffic stop on him, and as soon as he parked the car, he shot himself. And this was, I know you've seen some of these cities, Rancho Penasquitas. That's obviously an affluential area. Most people think that kind of stuff doesn't happen in these little towns. Santee, this area was a very quiet neighborhood, multi-million-dollar homes. You know, you think it's affluential, so that's not going to happen there. It does. January 30th, Shelby, 45, was shot to death by his girlfriend's ex-husband, Jesus Rodriguez, 34, outside in Imperial Beach. Jesus was found guilty first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years to life in state prison. September 11th, Navarrete was stabbed to death by his girlfriend's former boyfriend, Jose, in the girlfriend's apartment in Bonita. Jose pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter, and his sentencing was in October. I don't know what the outcome of that sentencing was. So this is just kind of to show that, you know, this victim is 16, this victim is 83. It's in every single geographical area from Spring Valley to El Cajon, Lakeside Santee, Rancho Penasquitas, Point Loma. There's not, you know, one specific area where this kind of stuff happens. It happens everywhere, including every race and ethnicity. I have a PowerPoint or another slide down the road that kind of goes into that a little more. Because of this and the homicides, the county created the DV protocol. That was so that every agency in the county gets on the same page. They respond the same way. They have policies in place so that it's not, hey, this happened in Escondido, but we don't do the same things like in San Diego. So every city does the same thing. We're all on the same page. This was done obviously to promote victim safety, protect the exposed children, abuser accountability, and have a coordinated response. Protecting the exposed kids is very important to kind of break that cycle of violence, and that kind of is in another slide, the power and control wheel and things of that nature. But we're trying to prevent kids that are exposed to domestic violence at an early age to keep them either out of the out of becoming a victim and also out of becoming a suspect, which unfortunately happens a lot. So domestic violence, what is domestic violence? It's a pattern of behavior in a relationship that is used to gain and maintain power and control over your intimate partner. Abuse is psychological, physical, sexual, emotional, and economic. DV affects every age group, gender, religion, ethnic, racial group, socioeconomic status, education level, and sexual orientation. There's nobody that is not affected by domestic violence. I'm sure even in our group we can think of or have a personal experience with domestic violence of some kind, either knowing a friend or family or seeing it personally. No one's immune to this. The penal code defines abuse is defined as intentionally or recklessly causing or attempting to cause bodily injury or placing another person in reasonable apprehension of imminent serious bodily injury to himself or herself or another. So that is pretty broad. I think it's important, obviously, that abuse is this presentation specific to these specific relationships. Obviously, someone on the street that batters you and you're a stranger does not have the same penal code protections as it would if there was a specific relationship. So those relationships are defined as a former or current spouse, a cohabitant, co-parent, dating or engaged. So if you were previously dating, previously engaged, used to co-parent, maybe used to live together, ex-wife, ex-husband, things of that nature. So who's at risk for domestic violence? Anyone, like we said. Common triggers for domestic violence can be money, children, infidelity, substance abuse, mental illness, and learned behavior, like we're talking about the kiddos seeing it at a young age. I know that for this specific presentation, you guys wanted things to look for, especially if you're out there counseling people or just in your community, what you can look for to see if someone might be a victim of this. I think the power and control wheel is a great place to start. Obviously, one of these things in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that someone's being abused in their relationship. It can also just be a sign of maybe some mental health problems if they're feeling, suicidal, things like that, some depression or anxiety going on. But nonetheless, it is things to look for, for those people that we support. I'm going to start with isolation on here. I think that's probably the easiest one for us to recognize, especially if you are close with someone, maybe you see them, whether it's at church or work or in passing very frequently, you kind of get to know them, maybe hang out on the side. Isolation is used as a tactic to control what the victim does, who they see, who they talk to, what they read, where they go. Sometimes the suspect tries to limit their partner's outside activities, so just leaving the house at all. And they use jealousy to justify their actions. I think that's one of the easiest things to be able to see. If maybe you have a friend or someone in your in your community who you used to see all the time, maybe they got into a new relationship and it's, oh well, so and so doesn't want me to go out anymore. I can't talk to you anymore. She doesn't feel comfortable with me talking to you anymore. I can't have social media stuff like that. That may be a red flag, things to look at. Things out of the ordinary. Obviously, people's lives changing. You get married, you have kids, your priorities change. It's not to say that because maybe a friend doesn't hang out with you as much as they used to, it's this huge red flag. But things that are, obviously like, hey, so-and-so is not letting me talk to you anymore. I can't go out. Or if we do go out, they have to come, stuff like that. And then that also accompanying by any of these other things is the more and more these check the boxes you get, the more serious I think you should take that. The next one I'm going to do is minimizing, denying, and blaming. And this goes either way. This could be the victim or the suspect. Making fun of the abuse and not taking their concerns seriously, saying that the abuse didn't happen, shifting the responsibility for the behavior and saying the abuser caused it. I've seen this with victims. When you're saying, hey, you have a black eye, like, oh no, he didn't mean to, it was an accident, haha. No, it's not haha, it's a serious matter. And vice versa. If the victim is bringing, this to the suspect saying, hey, X, Y, and Z, hurt me, hurt my feelings, then like that didn't happen. That could be an example of that. Obviously, if we see somebody with bruising or cuts and things like that, that's an obvious one to look for. But even if someone just coming to you saying like, hey, so-and-so, push me or what have you, and then they're acting like it never happened. I hear that a lot. Obviously, we interview suspects and they say, nope, that never happened. That's very common. Another common thing is suspects using the kids if they do have kids in their relationship. So the suspect might be making the partner feel guilty about the children, criticizing them in front of the children, telling the children that the partner doesn't love them, or interfering with visitation if there is a split or a court-ordered visitation schedule going on. Economic abuse, this one's fairly straightforward. So the partner prevents them from getting a job, or on the other hand, forces them to get a second job or work really long hours, making the partner ask for money, not letting them have access to family income. That's a huge way of controlling. If they don't have access to, the car, to the bank account, they can't go do anything without the suspect, without them. I think that's a very strong way of controlling. Gender privilege, treating like the other partner like a servant, acting like the king or queen of the castle, being the one to define the partner's roles, and making false allegations. False allegations are also on the next one under coercion and threats. So threatening to make a false accusation, making or carrying out threats to do something. Obviously, if someone is telling you, oh, this person is threatening to hurt me, that is a huge red flag. Or if you happen to overhear something, someone in a parking lot talking, or I don't know everyone's roles within their community, but if you're a counselor or someone's talking to you, you're hearing these kinds of stories a lot. If they are confiding or disclosing that the person is actually threatening to hurt them, that's a very serious matter. Threatening to leave or to report the persons to welfare. Usually that's with CPS, the Child Welfare Services. They're threatening to report the other spouse to CPS. I've seen this also with immigration, threatening to report them to immigration, things like that. And the threats and coercion kind of go right into intimidation. It's the same thing. Partners making them afraid by using the threats, looks, gestures, destroying the partner's property, abusing the pets, or wielding weapons. Obviously, if there's any arguments where the suspect's holding some kind of knife or a gun or something like that, that's extremely dangerous. Abusing the pets is a serious problem as well. And then destroying the partner's property. I've seen this with fairly recently, one of the spouse, they broke up and they wanted their stuff in the house, and the suspect intentionally damaged the urn of a family member's ashes. And is it a crime? I mean, yes, it's vandalism for the urn, but it's so much deeper than that, you know, for the victim. So that does happen a lot, where they try and physically destroy things that are important to the victim. And then emotional abuse, putting them down, humiliating them, playing head games, not taking responsibility for their actions, ridiculing the partner's appearance or sexual performance. I think gaslighting also kind of ties into this emotional abuse, where, you know, you bring it to the offender's attention, like, hey, X, Y, and Z hurt my feelings, and then somehow they've turned it around on the victim, to where the victim's apologizing for even bringing it up, but they're not the ones who did anything wrong. I think a lot of people don't realize what gaslighting is, and, you know, fall victim to that as well. These are the biggest things I think to look for, just that power and control issue in a relationship. Let me check the chat really fast, make sure I didn't miss anything. And if you guys are counseling someone, I think it's good for you guys to know how law enforcement responds to a DV scene. I know that there's a lot of concern for people that don't want to call the police because they don't know how it's going to go. They don't want to go to jail. They don't understand. So if you guys understand how our response works, I think that can also help alleviate some fear of the person actually reporting it. So on a preliminary investigation, so whether it's a deputy or an officer, throughout the slides I mentioned deputy only because I'm from the sheriff's department, but officers, when they respond, they're going to be asking a lot of questions. They want to know where the victim is, where the crime occurred, where the suspect is, if they left on foot, in a car, the conditions of all the parties, if there's any medical treatment that is necessary for anyone, any kids that are present, any weapons involved. And then they're going to need to determine if a crime actually did occur, so they have to develop their probable cause, so that the PC there stands for them. They're going to separate and interview the victim, any witnesses, the suspect, and the reporting party. Sometimes those are the same, sometimes they're different. It's not always that the victim or the suspect call. Sometimes it's a neighbor, or it may be you if you're on the phone with someone, or, you know, you're the neighbor and you hear something, or you're on the phone with them and you hear the scuffle in the background and you're the caller. The law enforcement might be reaching out to you. They should be. Just to kind of see what was going on before the incident occurred and maybe some history. They're going to collect evidence, obviously, and document any injuries. They will ask about strangulation. They will offer an emergency protective order. That is what EPO stands for. There's another slide that kind of goes into more what the EPO is and how it differs from other restraining orders. They will remove all firearms at the scene. And then do any emergency referrals for CPS. So if there are kids present, they have to do an emergency referral to CPS. I know that's a big fear for victims, is that they have their kids there, CPS gets called, they feel like they're in the hot seat. And that is a valid concern. CPS does everything they can to work with the victim of a domestic violence to not remove those kids unless there is an absolute necessity to. That's my experience with CPS. I know that there are horror stories out there for victims, and I've been told that's why, you know, I didn't call again, was because of X, Y, and Z with CPS taking the kids. But there will be an emergency referral made by law enforcement to CPS if the kids are there. The deputies or officers need to provide the victim with their resource card. Obviously that's basic information. Fortunately for me in the position I'm in, I know there's a lot more resources out there than what's on this resource guide. So I think that would be a good thing to update so that there's more resources on these guides. There is a lot on there, but I think there's a lot of stuff that people don't know is out there for them. The deputies on scene will also have to decide who the dominant aggressor is. I know that that's been a issue for victims, I've been told by victims. So Deputies shall make a reasonable effort to identify the primary aggressor in any domestic violence incident. The primary aggressor is the person determined to be the most significant rather than the first aggressor. So I know I've had some victims kind of climb up and not tell you the whole story, where it's like, well, yeah, I did push past them first, but then they escalated it way higher and it turned into a strangulation or stabbing or something like that. Obviously, that conduct is the problem, not necessarily the initial, push past or bump. So if you do have a victim who's like, hey, well, I don't want to report it because, maybe I feel like I started it. That may not be the case, because we go by the dominant aggressor, not necessarily the first person who started it. Some of those considerations are the intent of the law to protect the victim, threats creating fear for physical injury, so stuff that has happened in the past, history of domestic violence. I know that when I was in the academy, it used to be the term of policing just the facts for that one day. We're going away from that, which is good. They want the history. They want to know what led up to this, rather than just, what's the issue today? It's like, okay, you slapped him today, but let's talk about the last 3 domestic violence incidences where, he has done X, Y, and Z to you. They take that into consideration, as well as self-defense, if there was any witnesses, the level of violence, any existing court orders, criminal history on both sides, and offensive and defensive injuries. And then the department discourages dual arrests. So if it's kind of a mutual combat, they need to decide who the dominant aggressor is. They almost never do we arrest both people, because we can usually always, figure out who is the dominant aggressor. The next slide is about penal code. You don't by any means need to know any of these. The only thing is there's some stuff maybe that people don't recognize as being related to domestic violence. Obviously, felony and misdemeanor physical abuse is pretty obvious. Sometimes criminal threats is not obvious to victims. If a suspect is saying, for example, I'm going to kill you, and the person believes it, they're in fear, for their life, and that person has the ability to do just that. They live in, Canada, they don't have the ability to come kill them right in that moment. But if they're like in this, the same town, they're on the phone, they're in person, those criminal threats is a serious matter, and that can be reported as well. Damage to phone lines. So if you're trying to call, or if the victim's trying to call and suspect takes the phone and smashes it, that's domestic violence related. False imprisonment, maybe they're not letting them out of a room in the home or not out of the car. There's both felony and misdemeanor, so if they're using force or not, that could be related to domestic violence. Vandalism, like we mentioned earlier, destroying their property. Stalking, the court order violations, the child abuse or endangerment, that comes in a lot while one person is holding a child while also being involved in domestic violence. The offender's not only endangering the victim, but also the child now, especially if the child were to be dropped or hit on accident. Animal abuse. I've seen this actually more and more with suspects hurting the victim's animal rather than them. I don't know why, if it's just to emotionally upset the victim more, then they're trying to do the most amount of damage. Victim witness intimidation. So if they get arrested or they call from jail or say text, I've seen texts on people's phones like, hey, you better tell the cops to go away. Don't say anything to them, tell them nothing happened, things like that. That can also be another charge, as well as kidnapping. If they're out on a date with somebody else or out with their friends, hey, get in the car, and they force them to get in the car and take off. They may not recognize that as a quote kidnapping, but that is, if they're going against their will, if someone's moving them from from point A to point B, however slight, that would be considered kidnapping. I had an example of this. I charged kidnapping. The victim arrived home, the suspect confronted her in the driveway and then forced her into the house. So it was only from the driveway to the front door, but that distance was substantial enough, and it increased her risk of being hurt, leaving a place of the public eye to being now inside. Then the district attorney charged kidnapping for that, even though it wasn't what everyone thinks of when you say the word kidnapping. So that's something to keep in consideration. Like I said earlier, the sheriff's department has a pro arrest policy, so whether or not this actually occurred, if there is probable cause that it did, someone's going to jail. So if one half says, yep, they pushed me, and the other half says, no, I didn't, they're going to jail. Studies that there's studies that have been done that says pro arrest correlate reduction of violence in the home, as well as prior arrest for domestic violence and decreased homicide risks. This was cited at 2003. I don't have a more updated one. That might have changed, but as far as that's what I have now. No cooperation from the victim is needed. This is important to note that this is for the arrest. Once this goes to court, the victim will be needed. Except in those extreme circumstances where the DA can file without the victim. 9 times out of 10, the DA will need the victim to testify. But we do not need the victim's cooperation for the arrest itself.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Samantha, I saw a hand up, but I think
Oh.
she may have put it down.
I'm sorry. Did you
That's
have a
okay.
question?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, this is Lilani Pirelli. I'm at Carol's house, Domestic Violence Safe House and Transitional Program. And I was just wondering the legal difference, because I have clients that have been, the legal difference between false imprisonment and kidnapping. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because that is something that I've seen occurred that family court doesn't really address, you know, because it's that DA thing, that criminal thing. And I do want to add, I'm really glad you included the pets in that, because it is another method that abusers use to control their victim, and control is key in keeping that person in that dangerous relationship. So yeah, thank you, Samantha.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so kidnapping, the best way to describe it is kidnapping is moving someone against their will from point A to point B. So let's say I physically grabbed you and I moved you from, your front driveway into your house. That's a movement. A false imprisonment is better described as not letting you move. So let's say you were already in the house, maybe you were in the bathroom and I barricaded the bathroom door and I'm not letting you out of that space. I haven't moved you anywhere, but I'm not letting you move. It's kind of the opposite. So a kidnapping would be to forcibly move someone, and then the false imprisonment is to use force to keep them from moving. Does that make sense?
It really does. Yeah, that clarifies a lot. Just one more thing to add, another little question. So if they're in a vehicle, because I've run into this with victims as well, for them to be kept in that vehicle, to put the child locks on and to be driving in such a way where they can't, there's just no way they can control the car, that they're really stuck. Does that fall under kidnapping or false imprisonment because you're moving?
Kidnapping because of the movement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, like for examples, maybe I live with my boyfriend and we were going to go to, whatever, go out to eat. We go from home to the restaurant. That was, consensual movement. I get in the car. We're now inside the car at the restaurant in the parking lot, and the locks go on. He won't let me leave, but the car hasn't moved. That's more false imprisonment. The issue is when you're driving. So let's say you started to go back home and I'm like, hey, stop and let me out. No, I'm not letting you out. Stop and let me out. No, that movement, it changed it from a false imprisonment into a kidnapping. Sometimes false imprisonment is a lesser included into kidnapping, but it can kind of ebb and flow a little bit.
Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah. Okay, so my next slide is about strangulation. Like I said earlier, obviously, if you're seeing bruising or cuts on a victim, that's very obvious. Part of that could be around the neck, if there's any kind of rope burns, cord burns, bruising, any facial injuries to the lips or the ears. Behind the ears is a big one, as well as to the chin. That's not on this slide, but a lot of instinct, if someone goes to put their hand over your neck, is put your chin down. And a lot of times we see injuries to the chin. as well as the petechiae, the red spots, the red spotting either to the whites of the eyes or around the eye itself to the skin. The petechiae is very explicit towards strangulation. So we see this a lot with child abuse. If there's a little kid that has the petechiae and the parent says, oh, he just screamed and screamed and screamed and broke the blood vessels. Like, that's not how that works. It's a, you know, scientific thing. That is the loss of oxygen to the brain. It's not because of them, you know, straining so hard and bursts one blood vessel. That's different than this petechiae where it's a bunch of little spots. That is much different. And for anyone who's not familiar, the strangulation is the blockage of the carotid and jugular vein. Obviously, blood flows to the brain. The blood's not flowing, it's not getting oxygen. So within 6 to 15 seconds, if that pressure is blocked for that long, you start to lose consciousness. Within 2 to 4 minutes, brain damage can occur as well as death. It only takes 11 psi to block the carotid artery. For reference, opening a can of soda takes 20 psi. So almost half the pressure you would use to open a can of soda is what can cause that airway to be constricted. Because of that, it's not very much. A lot of times there is no injuries. You don't see it, there's nothing physical. And then even if there were, it goes away pretty quickly sometimes if it's only redness. If it was reported right away, a lot of times we do see redness, but if it's not reported till a couple days after, it is very common that that redness and the injury, the visible injury, goes away completely. Part of my next slide was that I'll get to it. Female survivors of strangulation are 6 times more likely to be victims of attempted murder and 7 times more likely to be victims of murder. So a history of strangulation does put you at a higher risk for homicide. The study of 300 strangulation cases in San Diego, 50% had no visible injuries and 35% of cases injury was not sufficient enough to photograph. So that's where I was going with that the, you know, over half the time there is no visible injuries in a strangulation. In the same study of the 300 cases, only 3 survivors sought the medical attention that they needed. So this happens a lot. You go on scene, they say, yep, you know, I was strangled or choked and hey, do you want medical attention? No, for many different reasons. They don't seek the medical attention that they need. My next slide is about DAFIs and the forensic interviews. We always encourage them to get medical treatment as well as a DAFI. But you know, sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes it's not feasible. I know, you know, everyone has their different reasons for things, doing and not doing things. Onto the side, this is just a pie chart about the homicides from 97 to 2018. The most common method of homicide was shooting, followed by stabbing, and then strangulation. So strangulation is on the top 3 there. So for the forensic exams, we call it a DAFI. It's a domestic assault forensic exam that's done with a nurse, law enforcement, and an advocate. It's not necessarily invasive. Obviously, it's a exam of the neck. The nurse does their whole charting. It's a lot of questions. That helps us a lot for court. It is not necessary for court, but it is also helpful for the victim. They get their medical treatment, as well as a lot of resources and counseling and stuff, and hooked up with the advocate and someone to kind of walk with them through this. Obviously, if there's a sexual assault element, we also do the forensic exam for the sexual assault. That's a SART for people that aren't familiar. I guess CSI might describe that as a rape kit. It is called a SART. Both the DAFI and the SART have a time frame. So that has to be done within the first 5 days. Obviously, if there is a very severe case where there's still injuries after the 5 days, they can do a case-by-case basis and consult with the nurse to still get it done, even if it's past the 5 days. But typically, there's a 5-day maximum for when they can, you know, do that. If it's past the 5 days, usually the evidentiary value is diminished a lot, if not completely. And then my next slide is about why domestic violence calls are potentially dangerous. Obviously, this is geared towards law enforcement and the suspect and the victim. But I think it is pertinent to you guys, especially if you know somebody, or maybe you are the reporting party. If you're witnessing this, whether it's a family, friend, or just in public, you happen to be somewhere and you start making calls because you're witnessing something happening. One of the homicides that were on the Never to Be Forgotten slide, it was a victim and her sister. The sister was killed because she tried to intervene with the suspect, so she was killed as well. These scenes are emotionally charged. Obviously, there's an element of unknown. We don't know what the suspect's thinking, don't know what the victim's thinking. There's very unpredictable behavior from both sides. A big one is the loss of control by the abuser. Obviously, they're facing punishment. Sometimes there's a reluctant victim. Sometimes children are present. There is a potential for murder-suicide. Obviously, we saw that in the Never to Be Forgotten. There was a lot of those offenders that committed the homicide also killed themselves. And there's also a suicide by cop element. This news article here that I attached was in Lakeside. This was a TRO violation on the reservation at Brona. Victim calls. I believe they've been to this house before. They knew the suspect. They knew the victim. She calls us, hey, he's here again. He's a violation of the TRO. They go in there. They're talking to the victim. All right, let's go upstairs. We're going to go tell, Joe Schmo he's got to go. And, you go to jail or you can't be here. They announce themselves. They go to walk up the stairs. It's a 2-story. Suspect turns the corner and fires down the staircase at the deputies and the victim. Ends up striking the victim in the leg, and then ran back upstairs and barricaded himself. The upstairs room he barricaded also had an attached balcony, so he could see out. Obviously, people start showing up, deputies arriving, and he's, shooting at the deputies that are arriving because he can see them coming before, they even know where the house was. So that took a while for, obviously it's a 6-hour standoff, the victim to be able to, evacuate with the deputies. Eventually he was taken into custody, victim recovered, but this kind of thing does happen a lot. I know there was just a shooting in Spring Valley, I think that was related to a TRO violation. And then also the homicide that was outside the courthouse recently, where the suspect shot and killed the ex-girlfriend, the new boyfriend, and then got into a shooting with law enforcement a couple hours later, where a Harbor PD guy was shot in the leg. So it happens frequently. This was in 2020. Obviously, we just had a couple this last 2 weeks. So it's not something that happens outside. Obviously, it can happen anywhere. Both of these were related to court orders. So there's a little bit more about the court orders I was talking about earlier. I think this is important for you guys to know, especially if you have someone who's wanting some help and they want to get a TRO, if you guys have knowledge of the TROs and maybe kind of what they can and cannot offer. An EPO is an emergency protective order. This can be sought 24/7 by law enforcement. Here it says deputies may seek, but law enforcement can seek the EPO on behalf of the victim. These are only good for 7 days. This only gives the victim time to go get a more long-term restraining order. The 2 long-term restraining orders that are most often obtained are just a TRO, it's a temporary restraining order, or a domestic violence order after hearing. The domestic violence order after hearing is requested by the victim and is issued for a specific period of time. Sometimes that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, depending on the details of the case and what the judge deems is appropriate. And then a CPO is a criminal protective order. This is issued by the court. And a lot of times is used when there's a pending criminal proceeding, or issued as a condition of probation after the conviction. We have our whole court field services unit that works on TROs. They get very convoluted, especially when you have conflicting TROs, when they get them against each other, and law enforcement doesn't know which one to go on. The one that gets enforced is the one that was sought most recently. That's how law enforcement does it. So if you're friend or family, or you have a TRO and the other person gets a TRO and vice versa, they will go by the one that was most recently obtained. As of now, I know that that can cause some issues, and sometimes these need to be handled by case basis. But that is how it stands as of now. I know there's probably a lot of questions surrounding TROs. I myself have questions surrounding TROs. One of the big things I'm running into is that the TROs in their service. So obviously the victim obtains a TRO, they have to go get the victim or the suspect served. So the suspect gets served their TRO, they know about it. You can't violate something you don't know about, so they have to be served. And then the proof of service needs to be returned to the court. That unfortunately, that burden falls on the victim to make sure that is done. It was my understanding that if law enforcement served it, it was good to go. I have now learned since being in this new position that just an officer serving it out in the field is not enough. The victim still needs to go take the proof of service to the courthouse. That way, when the court goes, they go to their next hearing, the court actually has a physical copy. That's a problem with the courthouse. It's a disparity with law enforcement as well. So we are working on that to get that, some corroboration so that things aren't falling in between the cracks with TROs. Kind of a down and dirty about TROs. The only way to change a TRO is to go to the court and get it changed. There's no way for, let's say I have a TRO with my spouse and I decided, I actually do want to talk to them for childcare. That cannot be done. You guys they can't make their own rules regarding it. If they want to have an amendment saying like, hey, yeah, we can talk peacefully about, the kids, they can amend it. That's not a problem. But it does need to get amended. Obviously, if you guys are talking, maybe, oh yeah.
Quick question, because you're talking a little bit fast and I'm trying to take a couple notes.
Oh, I'm
Because
sorry.
I have most of these things you're talking about, I'm dealing with them right now with the customer. So I want to be clear. So the TRO, once it's been served, even if the sheriff serves it while they have them in custody,
Yep.
she should still go down and do the proof of service. I just want to be clear on that. She should.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All
Yep. Right. I just talked to a clerk at the courthouse yesterday about alternative ways to get the proof of service to the courthouse so that the victim's not having to go to the court yet again. There is an option to mail it and it's either mail, in person, or e-filing. I don't have the option to e-file. I know the DA's office does here at One Safe Place. They can e-file. I imagine that's the same with the Family Justice Center in San Diego. As it stands, the sheriff's department doesn't have that option to do that for them. I spoke to the clerk about mailing it, and the problem with the mail is obviously it can get lost in the mail, and there's no receipt of it. So the court doesn't call the victim and say, hey, we received your proof of service. So they mail it off and then they don't hear back and they never know, kind of what happened with it. I asked, how can we get around that? She said, if the victim mails the original with copies, the court will send back the copies. And that could be a receipt saying like, hey, if the court's sending you back your copies, you know that they got it. But that doesn't seem like the most secure way of doing things. And she suggested it being done in person. So those are the only options right now. I'm trying to see if there's an option for fax, but so far we don't have that option. So the burden is on the restrained party. So if the protected person maybe is calling or reaching out about something, and then they respond, the restrained party responds, the restrained party is still in violation of the TRO. I know that we've gone to scenes where it's the restrained party's like, well, I was just responding to her. I wasn't trying to like harass her. Sorry, man, it doesn't matter. You're still in violation of the restraining order. You knew it. The burden's on you to abide by it. So I don't if that comes up. If they want to speak about certain things, they can always amend the TROs. They have options, so it's a no negative contact. So they can have contact, it just can't be negative contact. has to be peaceful, or maybe specifically about the kids on talking parents or something like that. I see a hand. You have a question?
Go ahead with your question.
I see someone's through the little hand. I saw a hand. It's gone now, but I wanted to pause if anyone had a question.
She's not coming off mute, so maybe not.
All right. So for TROs as well, the violation does not have to occur in the presence of an officer for them to make an arrest. So if victim calls and says, hey, he was here earlier, she was here earlier, she's texting me, they can, they show you their cell phone with the texting logs, what have you. Or maybe Ring camera says, hey, this is him walking up to my door. An arrest can still be made based on that. It doesn't have to be, the suspect does not have to be on scene when we get there for an arrest to be made. So like I was saying, is there any questions about TROs before I move on?
I do have a question on the CPO.
Yeah.
That protective order. So that one's done through the district attorney's office, so she wouldn't have to file proof on those types of protective orders.
Usually those protective orders are done at the courthouse, and usually the suspect is present. So if the suspect's present in court and they've served it at the court hearing, then no, they don't need to do a proof of service because he was there and the court did the service themselves. However, if they're not at the courthouse, the suspect didn't show up, and the judge issues it and sends them home with all their stuff, there should be instructions on the service. So the suspect still does need to get served. And if the victim still needs to serve the suspect, then yes, the victim needs to turn in the proof of service still.
Okay, could she get in that particular case, because I have one of those, if would the sheriff be able to serve him?
Yes, the only caveat is that another form, it's like we're like the DMV, nothing can get done the first time. Another form does need to get filled out, and I can email you that form. I have it. It's SER-001. It's like a serial one. It is a request for law enforcement to serve the TRO. It has to be like a formal document that gets turned in. It can't be like she gets it and she goes to a Poway substation, says, hey, can you guys go serve this? They probably won't go do that. It has to be done with our court field services, and like the formal request's got to be done.
Yes, thank you. I do need that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, cool. So just some examples of resources for victims. Obviously, I think you guys are well aware of most of the resources out there. These resources, Community Resource Center, Attorney's Office, Victim Advocacy Program. For the DA, they only use their victim advocates for victims that have an open case that's been submitted to the DA. Center for Community Solutions, Women's Resource Center in Oceanside, Indian Health Councils, Licensed to Freedom, East County, South Bay Community Services for those in South Bay, the Family Justice Centers, the one in San Diego and in San Marcos. And they can get legal assistance, counseling, advocacy support, help with getting into a shelter, getting their children some services, and safety planning. Obviously, you guys are also a resource for them in your faith community, especially if they're, confiding in you, or if you're doing some kind of counseling with them, things of that nature. And since, the reality of it is that victims are the best source of safety. We can safety plan all we want, but sometimes, they're just not foolproof. The prosecution of offenders is only a small part of the approach to DV. I know that it can get frustrating, especially with us helping others, or as law enforcement or probation or what have you, where we're like, hey, I don't understand. Like, we had this rock solid case and the DA didn't pick it up, what have you. Whatever the reasons are, law enforcement operates on a probable cause standard. So I like to say 50% plus one. So 51% this happened. Yep, you're getting arrested. Whereas the DA, they got to evaluate cases based on a proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So I don't know what movie it came from, but it's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove is very accurate. It's very true, unfortunately. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that they think just because someone got arrested, it means they're going to get convicted. And then when they don't, there's a lot of frustration and anger, towards either the advocate or law enforcement or the DA's office, what have you. And it is just a crappy reality. That is the way things are sometimes. Early intervention for children exposed to DV is the focus. So that's why CPS does get the referral. It's to give them resources. It's not to, be punitive towards the victim in any way. It's to try and, break this cycle of violence with the kids that are involved. And the victim's cooperation is very important, especially when it comes to court and going through the court process. Obviously, sometimes victims are more likely to cooperate with the advocate or with their social worker than they are with law enforcement or the DA's office. So any cooperation that, you guys can garnish with the victim is very, very much appreciated. And, as always, take care of yourself. You guys are listening to these cases and bearing a huge burden. You can't help anyone else if you're not doing good yourself. So talk to somebody, talk to your friends. If you see somebody struggling, reach out to them. We can't help anybody if we're hurt. We used to say that to trainees when we were responding to radio calls. If they're driving like a bat out of hell and they crash, you're not going to the call. So, you can't help other people if you're, in a bad place. So I know there was a lot of information, a lot of time. I was watching the time. I was trying to keep it under an hour. If there's any questions right now, or if you have questions, if you want to write down my email on my desk line, give me a call. I can get back to you as soon as possible with an answer. But otherwise, any questions right now?
I do have a question on the strangulation situation. I have a current customer that, she's had it several times. And so finally, I guess this last episode, finally, she was convinced to go get that forensics exam. And, but sometimes in your presentation, sometimes women just won't go get that because they may think they don't need it, right? But that's a very high risk because of the percentages that end up, in dead. So I just wanted to ask, and maybe someone else could ask, if there's a social worker or clinician or Dr. Vanessa, if she's here, and also Pastor Gerald Brown. What would be a great way to approach her, to convince her or to encourage her to get that forensics exam, because they need to understand the danger that's attached to that. I say from the first time, if he ever puts his hands on your neck. So what would be a method that could help them to realize this is something you really should do?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is also even just sharing statistics with that statistic with them that, they are 6 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide and 7 times more likely to be the victim of an attempted homicide. I don't think people know that in and of itself. When, we can say, hey, this puts you at a higher risk. Yeah, okay. But if you say, hey, you're 7 times more likely to be killed if if strangulation is in your past with this offender, that's very high. And then if it's happening repeatedly, I mean, not that it compounds the stats, but it wasn't a one-time thing. This has been happening over and over again. That is just more and more and more and more increasing, your lethality, if you will. I think rapport is a big way. If they know you and they trust you, it's going to be really hard if they have no idea who you are and you're just coming at them with information. But I think just convincing them that it is serious, and that, we want to help them. If they don't want to go through with a court process, you can always tell them that, like, hey, I get it. You may not want to deal with the court. You may not want to deal with law enforcement, what have you. They can still seek medical attention and medical attention only if that is a problem for them. I know that they do that with SARTs that say, hey, yes, this happened, but I don't want to deal with the court. I just want to, get a medical exam. or forensic exam. That can be done. They can do that without, us being involved very minimally. We can talk to the nurse and the advocate, and if they don't want to talk to law enforcement, that's totally fine. That could be maybe something you can bring to them if that's a concern. I mean, sharing that power and control wheel, I think, is a big thing. They may not understand what those signs are, and that, they are in a bad relationship. Some people don't think so because of the gaslighting and the narcissism and what have you, that they think, no, this person loves me. They said all these things yesterday, but then they did this stuff today, but they don't really mean it. That's all part of the cycle of violence, and maybe sharing that with them might help just educate them about it.
Okay,
But
thank you very much.
sometimes no matter what you do, they've made their decision, so. I don't know if anybody has any input or anything that's worked for them.
I actually have a clarification question regarding the domestic violence domestic abuse forensic exam.
Yes.
Can a victim request one themselves, or does it have to be through law enforcement for the?
I think that they could do it themselves, just like you would do a SART. If they went to the hospital themselves and said, hey, I want to get my neck looked at, I want to do this domestic assault forensic exam, but I don't want to have law enforcement involvement, the hospital will probably still call law enforcement to at least get the, because they're mandated, they have to, just as they do SARTs, but the SARTs, they have a whole process for not talking to the victim, that we just give them the case number and it's just a non-participating SART and it's kind of done. I don't know specifically about Daffy's if they will. I think it is a little bit of a case-by-case basis, depending on if there is, visible injuries, how long ago it was, if there is an immediate medical need, like, hey, yes, I need medical attention right now, absolutely, they'll go forward with that. I don't know if someone's like, hey, 4 days ago this happened and it doesn't hurt anymore, I don't have any more injuries, but I kind of just want to do this exam. I don't know if they will. I know that Daffy's are not always done at the hospital. Sometimes they're done at not say a satellite campus, but somewhere else. I know the Santee station does them. Obviously up here at One Safe Place will do them. And normally people wouldn't come into One Safe Place as a hospital. I don't know if they will, but if someone does go to the hospital, they obviously have to give them care. And then if they call law enforcement, the victim has no obligation to talk to law enforcement. So I don't see why they couldn't get one done. Hopefully that answered that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Good morning, everyone. I'm as already mentioned, Pastor Gerald Brown, and I apologize for coming in late, a busy day already. I did have a question. You may have covered it already as it relates to TROs. Has any thought went into how do you close that door? Because while TROs work for some, what we've seen across the country is that pretty much folks will ignore the TRO if they are in, whatever is going through their minds, if they have a mental illness or whatever the case may be. And so is there a close the door to ensure that that person is protected? And then to the earlier point of, interaction with a victim, let me just say that law enforcement shows up and does the best job they can do. However, when you're dealing with someone in situations like this, especially from a faith-based point of view, the pastor, the imam, the rabbi, we really have to find someone that really has shown that person that they care about them. Law enforcement cares about their safety, but the overall care comes from their faith leader, or should come from their faith leader, from their family. And oftentimes the family is left out of the situation. Mother, father, sister, brother, they don't want them to know because of whatever thing, the shame, or whatever they're trying to cover. But the old saying goes, people don't care about how much you know, how much technology you have, what exams you have until they know that you care about them. And so, is there any process where law enforcement will reach out to family members as this process is going forward?
So as far as,
TROs.
yeah, you're very correct. TROs are a piece of paper and that's it. Sometimes people do not respect them. They don't care. I think that's another element to the power and control that says, hey, you know what? I know you have this and I don't care and I'm going to do what I want anyways because I can. That's a huge problem. And other than repeated arrests and that person continuing to get arrested for the restraining order violations, there's not anything that law enforcement or the victim for that matter can ensure and like specifically do to keep that person, from acting on their own accord. Because all they, once they get released, they could go right back to the house. One of the only things is we do provide, I know the DA's victim advocacy program has brought it up and I'm blanking on what it's called, but where the victim can actually change their address and get a confidential address, as well as maybe a name change or something like that, so that if they were to move and try and protect that confidentiality to keep the suspect from finding them. That's, I think, the best way of maybe preventing the suspect from continuing to come around is if they just don't know where the victim is. And then if they have a confidential address, the address is what gets put on all the court documents. So that way, whatever copies that the suspect does get, that address is not where the physical address where the victim is staying. I think that's been the most successful thing as far as keeping the victim safe and away from the suspect, since the suspect doesn't even know where they are. But you're right, the TROs are just a piece of paper, essentially, and people can, choose to ignore them if they want. As far as law enforcement reaching out to family, that typically does not happen. The detective that gets assigned to each domestic violence incident will reach out to the victim. Most of the time, the victims, like you said, they don't want their family to know. I've had where they've requested me talk to family, which is totally fine. I don't mind doing that. But if it doesn't get brought up, most of the time it's not common practice for us to reach out to the families. It's kind of on the victim if they're going to share that with their family or not, especially if it doesn't have any bearing for the case, if you will. If the family member was a witness, then absolutely we want to talk to them. But if they're if they're the support for that person, but they're not, a victim themselves or a witness, or maybe the reporting party or something like that, if they don't have any involvement in the actual case, most of the time they don't get spoken to. Did that answer your question?
It did. I would just ask, as I was listening to you talk, is a part of the process to ask them a question. Do you know, or do you have a faith leader? And if you have a faith leader, can we contact that faith leader? Because again, as pastors, as other members of other faiths, we usually are either the third, fourth, fifth person to know what's going on. I know in some cases you have to have a good relationship again with that person. But is there any part of the process where you just insert a questionnaire? Is there anyone you want me to talk to? Do you have a faith leader? Can we contact the folks that you would like for us to talk to? And if they say no, we understand, because at that time, you don't want to push the person too hard. All right. But at some point along the line, I usually get involved. I've had just to say that CPS has called me for someone when a child has been abused. They call me and I show up and they give me the child until the parent is working out the going through their plan. There's got to be something somewhere, and I think you mentioned it, the Victim Advocacy Fund. Is there a Victim Advocacy Fund where they can, in fact, get housing and be moved to some other place? You may have answered it already, but that's just something that's on my mind now.
Yeah, no, that's great input. I as it stands right now, that's not a typical question that gets asked. I know at least when I was working in Santee, and getting domestic violence cases, I was asking about like support, and if they had, you know, family or friends or somebody that, you know, was their support for them going through this, as well as making sure they got the resource pamphlet and making sure that they had, they knew that there were resources out there for them. I think that would be a great thing to add to, let's say, hey, do you have, you know, do you have a faith community that you rely on? Or, you know, if the answer is no, that is what it is. Maybe, you know, I can add it to the resources, like, hey, maybe consider this. Or if they say, yes, I do, hey, you know, do you want me to reach out to them? Or, you know, maybe you could consider reaching out to them and talking to them about this. If law enforcement were to reach out, or the detective were to reach out, are you thinking more of a response in the moment for like big serious cases, or more just to notify that, like, hey, maybe this person needs some follow-up with you guys down the road? How is that? I know you mentioned the child abuse one where you actually like came out to the scene. I know that we have used like chaplains from our department if like there's been like a major scene or a shooting or something like that where someone, you know, needs some extra support. We can utilize our chaplains for that. So I guess that does happen on occasion, but it's normally for, you know, homicides, shootings, stabbings, really large scale things, not necessarily a domestic violence case that, you know, the detective gets assigned that maybe it happened a few days ago.
Sure.
So
I think that again, communication is good. And I'm on this call, and again, I apologize for coming in late. It's not that I, as a faith leader with a member, I need to know how I can support that member. If
yeah,
that member does not want me to be in it, okay, so be it. You know, again, I'm there. All of these situations, whether small or large, you know, hopefully we would agree that it's traumatic, you know, and
absolutely.
especially
Yeah.
when children are involved in it. So I would say that, you know, again, ask that question, you know, do you have a faith community, a faith leader, or someone that you would like to talk to? You know, if this is no, well, you also have chaplains, you know, as you mentioned with the sheriff department, you know, would you like to talk with one of them or something like that, just to give the person some other, because usually that question is not asked. And
Yeah.
again, we are standing by to partner with law enforcement to ensure that community members are there. I know that we're giving the best service that we possibly can to the community member. If I find out about it, it's usually way after the fact, you know, because the person won't come to church if she or he has any physical type of you know, abuse that's visible. And so I'll check on folks. I'll have my deacons call folks to find out where they were. But most of the time, we don't hear about the domestic violence situation unless it becomes really bad. And so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a couple of steps ahead that we find out about things sooner. Uh, you know, and also in briefing. I apologize.
We understand, Pastor, and we appreciate you being with us. And Amelia's going to email you the entire presentation after this is over, just so you know.
Well, thank you for
Yeah.
that. And again, you know, I apologize for coming in late. It has been a morning already. And I'm
Yeah.
thankful though that you folks are engaging in this conversation because it really needs to happen. a lot more with clergy. And as clergy, we cannot stick our heads in the sand and act like we didn't see something or didn't hear something, because again, we are mandated reporters. We are looking out for the person's soul, but we're looking out for everything else that's going to help that person to move forward. And so thank you to the sheriff department and law enforcement for making this information available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great input. And I would like to start adding that to our protocol, maybe to start asking more of those, relationship rapport questions rather than just, the facts. And Ruth, I saw you have your hand up a few times.
Yes, my thing is for the pastor that just came on. This
Okay.
is very beautiful to see the difference. Because when I went through this, like almost 20 years ago, we're both members of the church, and I went to the church, they were actually trying to want us to go into counseling. I'm like, my life is in danger. You know what I'm saying? But they were trying to hold biblical and religion around me, saying, what God has put together, and let's go to counseling. And I'm like, you don't know what I'm going through. But we are both members of the church. He was a deacon. And it was like what I was saying didn't make any difference. That let's preserve this relationship. I didn't want to preserve the relationship. I wanted to get out of that relationship. So to see that there's a turn makes me feel so much better, because not only was my body, mental, and all that, my spiritual was being attacked at that point, because I was going there for help, and I wanted to know what steps to take. And I thought that would be the safe place for me to be, especially I was in another state. I didn't have any other family. I knew that was supposed to be my safe haven. And it turned out to not to be that. So to see that pastors are starting to be more proactive in assisting, because it's so terrifying to even go through something like that, and even to take the steps to get a TRO. I got a TRO, and as we're walking out the courtroom, he looked at me and said, I hope that piece of paper can block a bullet. And I'm like, ooh, now, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
So I
And
really
thank you, Ruth.
I am just so excited
Yes.
to know
And
that they're
here's how
starting
you
to
can
really look at this and really be able to assist in something like this. I really, 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 really thank you, and hope more and more and more pastors, ministers, leaders take it seriously.
And that's how you can help us, Ruth. And then this subgroup of the DB Council is to invite pastors and rabbis. I mean, I've been plowing this for 3 years now, and I'm really grateful when a pastor shows up. But you know what I learned recently? That when law enforcement is doing the presentation, the pastors, they will show up. They will show up, and so that's one of our goals is to strengthen our community, the DB community, and I love what Samantha said, that she's going to add it to her protocol, that question be asked. So now we're making some progress, and I praise progress, because it really does need to happen. And I don't want to cut anybody off, but I wanted to just, I know Dr. Rodriguez is here, and I didn't know if she had any words she wanted to share with us, and in respect of everyone's time.
I just want to say, hi.
Hi.
I'm good. I jumped in late too, but I just want to thank Samantha for coming in and doing a very well informed presentation. I know she's been boots on the ground for some time, so I trust in her skill and her passion as well. So I'm just really thankful that we have her now in our community. So yeah, it's just she's a wealth of information, and she's open, and I trust her. So
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
So we normally meet every bi-monthly, and I think I'm gonna have to keep plowing the ground with law enforcement and and faith leaders. I really feel that that's it's showing now, it's showing proof that the need is really good. And I love that Pastor Brown he just went forward and said, why can't we ask that question? When you're, counseling with the person or interviewing them, and add that to the questions would be key. I know that my pastor would appreciate it too, because we hide behind the church. I'm sorry, that's the truth. We hide behind the church, and DV does. And so, but the one thing that we are offering, this subcommittee is offering, is training for churches and mosques and temples and rabbis. And we had our first church recently, earlier this year, a Lutheran church in Encinitas, and we met with them and their whole staff of teachers and preachers, and it was amazing. And so now they're connected, much better connected and equipped when that call comes, not if, when it comes, because it's not an if thing. It happens. It does. Domestic violence does not discriminate at all.
It does. If I might say, and please forgive me, I don't mean to cut you off, that as you're talking, I'm thinking about the fact of who I know as pastors, and I know quite a few. Bishop Benson, is a very progressive thinking, him and his wife, as it relates to domestic violence.
Right.
Rabbi Metzger of O Shalom is very forward thinking when it talks about domestic violence and other issues that are there. We have, Muslim imams who are very, very progressive, to use that term, in their thinking process. We cannot turn our backs on anyone, when they come to us. Oftentimes the challenges is that the church has limited resources or limited areas to know exactly where we need to go in order to help this person. I've been blessed because I have Amelia here, who kind of keeps me straight over the years to let me know, hey, you need to be on this conversation. We as pastors, we sit down and we talk to each other. Pastor Pope from Encanto Southern Baptist, he needs to be on this call. Pastor Benson, as I already mentioned, I mean, we can reach out to these folks and say, please, come and sit down. I know, for example, that Pastor Benson, and I've been a part of this group, 20 or so pastors met with the sheriff. We haven't met with the new sheriff. We met with the last two sheriffs to talk about those issues. So please invite us. Someone said, if you build it, they will come. Well, build it and invite us in to come, and to sit down and to break bread, to have some coffee and some danishes, to sit down, because pastors like to eat, imams and rabbis like to eat, okay? And let us talk about this serious topic, because we don't want to see anyone hurt at all. And these calls, as the person from the sheriff department will let you know, that these are some of the most dangerous calls for law enforcement. Because one moment while they're trying to establish and control the situation, when that person, male or female, sees that they're getting ready to put the silver bracelets on, the handcuffs, and all of a sudden it flashes in their mind, wait a minute, there goes rent, there goes food, there goes my protection, and yes, he did do this, but he really didn't mean it, or she did this, but she really didn't mean it. It becomes very dangerous for the law enforcement person at that time. And so again, invite us and we'll come. We'll come. I will shame other pastors into coming, and so, because we need to be here to understand. And the reality is that 80% of churches, small or large, are made up of the women who have sustained the church's mosque and synagogue. And so we really need to be available and to understand this process so that we can assist and help.
I love my crazy girl.
Dr. Vanessa, we hear you in your animal. So Samantha, I hear Pastor Brown
Sorry.
asking, that's okay, asking for this to happen again. So Pastor Brown, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you if you can help me get those 20 leaders, faith leaders to the table. I'm sure Samantha will meet with us again, and I'll get the Danish and the coffee.
Yeah,
Can we do
absolutely.
this
I
in
can,
January? Can we do this in January?
yep,
Samantha.
I can present this as many times as you guys like, in person, on Zoom, whatever works best for everybody.
Okay.
Let's do this if you don't mind. Okay, I'm going to ask it of your group. Would you bombard? Okay, military term. Will you continue to send out notices and send them out not just once or twice, because you're going
Okay.
through the holiday period? You have to
Right.
send it out at least 3 or 4 times to these folks. I will get the
Okay.
names of pastors that I know, imams and rabbis.
Okay.
I'm more than happy to give that to you. But please, you have to keep going.
Yes.
And then the day before or a week before, you have to give them a call. And if they can't come, can they send a representative
Okay.
on their behalf? And so again, I have some knowledge in organizing folks, but I share with you, you have to keep us in the know, and we really have to put it down on our calendar and accept it and say that we have to be here. And pastors are, for whatever reason, okay, my colleagues and rabbis and imams, think of themselves kind of up here. Some do, some don't. And if the person that is in charge of this outreach reaches out to them from H&S or whatever the case may be, they will come. They will.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you,
Yeah.
Samantha. Thank you, everyone, for
Absolutely.
joining us today. And we will meet again, and we won't be meeting in December, but we will meet in January for sure. And Samantha, we're going to do this again, and we're going to get 27 of those faith leaders to the table. I'm gonna go ahead and just declare that.
Perfect.
I appreciate you all so much, and thank you for the information, Samantha. Thank you for helping us to be able to help more. And so we
Absolutely.
really appreciate you. Happy
Absolutely.
holidays.
No, thank you.
Yes, happy holidays to each of you.
Likewise.
May your days be sunny and bright.
all right.
And lots of good food and love, lots of love.
Yes.
Love
Karen, you're
you.
so sweet.
All right. God bless you all.
God bless you too.
Bye.
All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes.
All
Bye.
right.
See you
Have a
soon.
good day.
Thank you. I'll
Yes.
send the recording out to everyone for those who weren't able to join the whole time.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.